At the end of this book, we hear the regrets of the scientists. Oppenheimer's famous recitation of the Hindu scripture, "Now I am become death, the destroyer of worlds," is contextualized not just as a cool quote, but as a genuine expression of a man wrestling with a soul-crushing burden. It is raining in Washington, D.C., on the afternoon of April 12, 1945. A heavy, gray spring downpour that seems to wash the color out of the Capitol. Vice President Harry Truman has just been summoned to the White House. He thinks he's there to discuss a minor political appointment, perhaps a postmaster job or a scheduling conflict. He is ushered quickly upstairs to the private study of Eleanor Roosevelt. She steps forward, places her hand gently on his shoulder, and says words that shatter the world as he knows it. "Harry, the president is dead." Truman is stunned. He asks if there is anything he can do for her. She looks back at him, shaking her head, and replies, "Is there anything we can do for you? For you are the one in trouble now." Within hours, Truman stands in the cabinet room, holding a Bible, his hand shaking slightly as he recites the oath of office. He is now the leader of a nation at war. But the true weight of the moment doesn't land until the room clears. Henry Stimson, the Secretary of War, lingers behind. He closes the door. He speaks in a low, grave tone. He tells the new president that the United States is not just fighting a war with tanks and planes. They are sitting on a secret project. They are on the verge of deploying a weapon of such unimaginable power that it could end the war in a single heartbeat, or perhaps end civilization itself. Truman, who has been vice president for 82 days, has never heard a whisper of it. He is hearing about the atomic bomb for the very first time. This isn't just a story about politics. It is the opening scene of a nightmare that became reality. Today, we are diving deep into The Devil Reached Toward the Sky, an oral history of the making and unleashing of the atomic bomb by Garrett M. Graff. This isn't your standard, dry history textbook that lectures you from a podium. This is an oral history. That means the story isn't told about the people. It is told by the people. Graff has combed through over 25 archives across the United States, Japan, and Europe to stitch together a narrative made entirely of voices. We are talking about memoirs, diaries, letters, and declassified transcripts from the people who were actually in the room, from the scientists mixing the plutonium, to the pilots flying the B-29s, and most hauntingly, to the people on the ground in Hiroshima and Nagasaki who looked up at the sky and saw the sun fall to Earth. The book moves with the pacing of a thriller, and the first major anchor of this narrative is the sheer, chaotic secrecy of the Manhattan Project. We often think of the atomic bomb as a pristine scientific achievement, a bunch of geniuses in lab coats writing equations on chalkboards. But the texture Graff uncovers is one of dirt, uncertainty, and profound isolation. You get the voices of the young scientists and engineers at Los Alamos, living in what was essentially a glorified muddy campsite in the New Mexico desert. They were brilliant, yes, but they were also in their 20s and still blowing off steam, drinking bad whiskey, and living under the intense hypnotic charisma of J. Robert Oppenheimer. The oral history format really shines here because you get the conflicting emotions in real time. You hear the scientists describing the technical thrill of the gadget, that's what they called the bomb, interspersed with the creeping dread of what they were actually building. There is a specific, tense energy leading up to the Trinity test. The book details the betting pools the scientists had. They weren't betting on sports. They were betting on whether the bomb would be a dud, or whether it would ignite the atmosphere and incinerate the entire planet. One scientist recalls the silence of the desert right before the detonation, a silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight, followed by a flash so bright that a blind woman miles away asked, "What's that light?" Then the narrative shifts gears. moving from the dusty mesas of New Mexico to the humid, oil-stained runways of Tinian Island in the Pacific. This is where the crews of the 509th Composite Group were stationed. This section of the book is fascinating because it captures the dissonance between the men and their mission. The crews of the Enola Gay and Boxcar were elite aviators, but they were also young men just doing a job. The book gives us the texture of their daily lives, the boredom, the poker games, the mechanics tuning the engines. Paul Tibbets, the pilot of the Enola Gay, comes across as a man of icy resolve. He named the plane after his mother, a detail that feels almost perverse, given what the plane was about to birth into the world. We follow them into the air on that fateful morning. The oral histories from the flight crew are chillingly clinical. They talk about cloud cover, fuel gauges, and drift. They were technicians executing a procedure, but the tension in the cockpit is palpable. They are wearing welder's goggles. They know they have to execute a sharp turn immediately after the drop to avoid being torn apart by the shockwave. The disconnect is jarring. Up in the sky, it's just switches and dials. And then, the book takes us to the ground. This is the third and most devastating narrative anchor. If the first half of the book is about the triumph of human ingenuity, the second half is about the triumph of hell. Graff gives the floor to the hibakusha, meaning bomb-affected people in Japanese, refers to the survivors of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima in August 6, 1945, and Nagasaki in August 9, 1945. This is where the oral history format stops being an interesting narrative device and becomes a punch to the gut. You aren't reading statistics about casualties. You are reading the memories of children. One survivor recalls the morning vividly. The clear blue sky, the hum of a lone plane. It was a beautiful morning. And then, the peak of dawn, the flash, and the boom. The sensory details here are horrific and necessary. Survivors describe the sound not as an explosion, but as if the universe itself had cracked open. They describe the heat. Instant, searing heat that patterned the fabric of their kimonos onto their skin. One account describes people wandering through the ruins, holding their hands out in front of them, skin hanging from their fingertips like wet gloves. They describe the thirst, the unbearable thirst, and the black rain that fell afterwards, a sticky, radioactive sludge that people drank because they were desperate, poisoning themselves further. What makes the devil reach toward the sky so compelling is that it doesn't blink. It places the sterile military transcripts of the damage assessment right next to the diary entry of a mother searching for her child in the rubble. It juxtaposes Truman's triumphant radio announcement. We have spent $2 billion on the greatest scientific gamble in history, and we have won, with the silence of a city turned to ash. It forces you to reconcile these two realities. You see the rescue workers, brave men and women entering a zone of death they didn't understand, exposing themselves to radiation that would kill them years later. You see the confusion of the Japanese military, who couldn't comprehend how a single plane could erase a city. The book also delves into the immediate aftermath and the dawn of the Cold War. It captures that brief, strange window where the U.S. was the sole nuclear superpower, and the frantic realization that the genie was out of the bottle. Now, let's talk about the critique. What does this book get right? And where does it stumble? What it gets absolutely right is the atmosphere. By weaving together hundreds of individual voices, Graff creates a tapestry that feels incredibly alive. You aren't looking at history through a telescope. You are standing in the room. The pacing is relentless. The countdown structure, counting down to the Trinity test, then counting down to Hiroshima, then Nagasaki, creates a natural driving tension that keeps you turning pages even though you know exactly how it ends. However, the strength of the oral history format is also its potential weakness. Because the narrative is fragmented into so many short snippets of dialogue and memory, it can sometimes feel overwhelming. You are introduced to dozens of names, ranks, and titles in rapid succession. If you aren't paying close attention, the voices of the specific scientists or military officials can start to blur together. It lacks the singular guiding hand of a traditional narrator who holds your hand and explains the context of every single event. Graff provides the connective tissue, sure, but he expects you to keep up. It's a book that demands your full attention. You can't really skim this one. Additionally, some listeners might find the shift in perspective jarring. You go from the high-level geopolitical strategy of the Potsdam Conference directly to the visceral gore of the Ground Zero emergency rooms. It's effective, but it's emotional whiplash. The book doesn't offer easy moral answers either. It presents the arguments for the bomb, the estimated millions of casualties of a land invasion of Japan, with as much weight as the moral arguments against it. It leaves the verdict to you, which can be frustrating for readers looking for a clear good guy, bad guy narrative. But of course, that is also the point. So, what is the verdict? The Devil Reached Toward the Sky is a monumental work. It is essential reading for anyone who wants to understand not just the what and the when of the atomic bomb, but the how it felt. It is perfect for history buffs, obviously, but it's also for anyone interested in the intersection of science, ethics, and human resilience. If you liked American Prometheus or the film Oppenheimer, this is the perfect companion piece because it expands the scope beyond just one man to include the thousands of people caught in the blast radius of history. It is a difficult read emotionally. It will haunt you. The images of the hibakusha and the descriptions of the initial blast are not things you will easily forget. But that is exactly why you should read it. In an age where we talk about nuclear weapons as abstract political tools, this book grounds them in the terrifying reality of blood, fire, and dust. If you are ready to have your perspective on the end of World War II deepened and challenged, pick this one up. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into the darker pages of history, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We have plenty more stories to tell, and you won't want to miss the next one. Thanks for watching.